Hello everyone, this is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. Wanted to welcome you to another Fusion 360 live stream. Apologize, I was gone for a couple weeks traveling, and last week Angelo did a customer visit, so he was gone all last week too. So we welcome you all back. We're basically doing part 5 of the miter saw stand. In fact, today we're going to be working on this part. We're going to be doing the rim and the tire. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Again, I'll put the drawing and my outline into the description of the live stream out on YouTube. It'll be there probably in a couple hours or so. I still need to upload that up there. So feel free to follow along and let's dive right in. So this is where we left off last time. We worked on creating the legs and the handle, and if you remember, we were able to position the legs, all that kind of stuff. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the wheel and the wheel rim. So what I'm going to do is let's create at the top level, I'm going to create a new component, and let's just call it wheel hub. So I'm going to start with the wheel hub and say OK. Now, I don't need all of this other stuff in the way, so I'm going to right mouse click on wheel hub and say isolate. Now, I see this happen a lot when I'm working with customers. They'll click on these individual eyeball icons to turn parts on and off, and that takes a long time. Well, if I just right click on this component and say isolate, it's going to turn off all of those other components for me automatically. So kind of a quick way of doing that. So let's go ahead and start by creating a profile. And I'm actually going to do this on the side plane or this right plane right now. And just going to draw a couple lines. Now, we recently added this new center line option. We've always had this construction line option, but we now have this center line, and it's actually really handy. In fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to select that. I'm going to hover over this. I'm just going to draw a line to the origin and then just up somewhere. I don't care how far. And you'll notice that the line looks kind of like a center line instead of a construction line, which is just dashed. And this is really handy when we go to mirror things. It knows that this is a center line, and it'll actually mirror for us and do some pretty cool functionality. Okay, I'm going to basically draw the shape of the hub. I'm not going to worry about dimensions or anything like that. I'm just kind of getting the basic shape of what it looks like. And so what's neat about this is I can quickly mock up what I want this to look like. In fact, I could even bring this center line and make it coincident with that guy there. So this is kind of the basic shape, and I can quickly see it's a valid profile. I paid a little bit of attention to make sure my lines were horizontal, vertical, etc. If I hadn't, I could come in and add these constraints in here. So for example, if I had made this line slightly angled like that as I was sketching, I could come in and say, you know what, I want that line and that line to be perpendicular with each other. Again, just using constraints to make sure everything looks the way I want it to look. Now I can come back and start adding in the dimensions. So I'll go ahead and maybe I'll just start here and say I want this guy to be 4 millimeters. Now you'll notice when I did that, it kind of became much smaller, right? So it scaled the whole thing down automatically for me. And this is an option in the preferences that I'm going to show you. And I find it really handy because I don't know if you've experienced this before, but when you go to type in a dimension, sometimes your sketch will do something like this because it's trying to keep those relationships. And by entering in the dimension, it kind of messed things up because of the scale or the size of your sketch. So that is under your icon or your initials, preferences. And this will bring up my preference dialog. And I think it is under design. Let me see, I always get scale entire sketch at first dimension. And you'll notice I have that turned on. I really like that option. So under General, Design, Scale Entire Sketch. Okay, so what this does now is as I start adding other dimensions, so for example, I want to go from here to here, and that's going to be, I think it's 62 according to my drawing. And this is kind of what I was talking about. You might see something like this happen if you didn't scale at the very beginning, and you can kind of see how this is farther down than I want it to be. So I'm going to bring that up just to, again, kind of keep my sketch looking the way I want it to look. Okay, then I can start, again, continue adding other dimensions in here. So this guy is 4, this is 2 millimeters. And then I'm going to basically tell the width here of 16. We can kind of see how that updated. And as you notice, as I'm starting to add these dimensions, all of these lines are turning black, meaning that they're fully constrained. So let me go ahead and put a 4 there. And a distance, let's go from here to here. I could do an angle, but in this case I did some dimensions. So I'm going to say 7, and you'll see how that kind of changed that angle for me. And I know it's exactly 7 millimeters from that point to that point vertically. I still see one blue line right there, and if I were to click and drag on it, it kind of shows where it's unconstrained. So it doesn't know how far away from the origin that line needs to be. So let's go ahead and throw, okay, so that says adding this dimension will over constrain. So let me try doing from there to the origin. I tried doing it to the line, so I'm doing it to the origin in this case. And let's do 6 millimeters. Oops, I clicked too fast. 6. Okay, I now have a profile that I can use. And you'll notice I actually drew basically half of the rim. So what I want to do now is mirror this onto the other side. Now here's where you could do this 3, 4, 5 different ways. I could revolve just half of this and then mirror the 3D model and combine them together. Or I could mirror my sketch and make it one solid revolve, and then I don't have to mirror and combine them together. So again, it's whatever you find easier. I'm going to mirror my sketch because I don't really show that all that often. So I'm going to come in here under Create Mirror, and it says what are the objects. So I'm just going to draw a box kind of around this here like so. What's my mirror line? I'll go ahead and select that as my mirror line, and you can see it gives me a nice preview of what that's going to look like. Now, I'm just correcting myself. I said earlier when you use a center line, it automatically mirrors for you. Why did it not do that this time? And the reason for that is because I actually drew a mirror line down here also. So Fusion didn't know which one did I want to mirror along, so it asked me to pick the line. If I had just had this vertical line, it would have mirrored for me automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And we can now see we have that profile. So let's go ahead and finish that. I'll select both of these profiles and say revolve. Oops, my mouse is acting funny. Create revolve. Now here you'll notice it says axis is selected automatically, and I saw a little error come up. The profile crosses the revolve axis, and that is because it did pick that one there. So I'm going to unselect it and pick, I can either do this axis or the one I drew, and as soon as I do that, you'll see it took that profile and it's revolving it around that axis. And because I dimensioned away from the axis a little bit, it's actually creating a hole for me automatically. That's kind of why I did it that way. Okay, so this is kind of the basic shape of the hub, the wheel hub. And you might say, well, could you have done that with just a cylinder and then some extrudes, maybe add some draft, all that kind of stuff? Absolutely. But you'll notice my timeline is quite simple. I've got a sketch and a revolve. And this sketch really does kind of define the shape of the hub. So that's why I ended up doing it that way. Okay, I'm going to add some more information in here. So I like to pre-select my face, say create sketch, and we'll draw a circle from the center, and we'll make that 33 millimeters in diameter. Okay. Then I can extrude this guy to basically create a boss. You'll see it just extrudes off that face. We have a little bit of a boss right there. And I lost my, give me just a second here, guys. We have a document that we share to look for questions. Okay, looks like everything's good. Okay, so I created the boss. The next thing I want to do, we're going to be creating these 3 ribs you see here. Okay, so we're going to use a cool command to do that. And I want to create a sketch. Now, the command we're going to use this web command. Now, you'll notice we have something called rib. And I called it a rib. Here, we're going to create these 3 ribs. Actually, what we're doing is we're creating a web. And you can kind of see the difference is this rib is kind of like external. You don't see it being bound by any faces, whereas a web, and I can't really move my cursor to show you, but you can see it's kind of inside that box cutter enclosure, whatever you want to call it. And the same thing here. We're going to have this web be inside this face here and this face here. So we're going to use the web command. When you do the web command, you want to draw your profile above and have it grow to where it needs to go. And this will make sense as we do this. So I'm going to create a sketch on this boss face right here. So I'm going to say create a sketch. I need to grab information. So I'm going to hit P for project. And that's going to allow me to click, for example, this face. And it's going to project the geometry of that face. So if I came in here and turned off the bodies, you'll see how it projected that face for me. Now what that allows me to do is I'm going to create a line. Now here's a trick I show all the time, or I should say a tip. I want to draw a line that's perfectly vertical right here. I also want it to be touching these 2 circles. So I'm going to purposely draw it kind of off to the side and then force it to be perfectly in line. Instead of me just clicking right here and hoping that I'm close, and I will guarantee you, you will not be close enough. It'll be just off a little bit. So I like to come over here, and you'll know it's kind of hard to see, but typically my cursor looks like a little plus, but as soon as I get near like an object line, you can see it turn to this little X, and that is the coincident constraint. It's going to automatically, it's assuming you want to catch to that edge. So I'm going to click there. Then I'm going to make sure I'm vertical, and then I'm going to come over to this circle, and again you can kind of see there's a little X right there. I'll make sure I'm vertical and I'll click, and what that did is it automatically created the coincident constraint. You can see it right there on both these points. There's the coincident constraint there. In fact, if I were to grab this line and move it, notice what it's doing. It's keeping that point on that edge. So just by clicking on the edge and clicking on the edge, it created the coincident constraint for me. And then what I can come in and say, I want this point to be vertical with that point. And we can see how, sure enough, that point is now vertical with that point. The line turned black. I know that it's fully constrained. And that's all we need for the web command, is we just need a line, and you can see how it's up on this face right here. Then we'll come in and say web. What's the curve? I'll click on that line there, and you'll see this little arrow, and I'm going to start to drag so you can kind of see what's happening here. Okay, so it's using that line and it's creating a web down to the next face, and because extend curves is turned on, you can see that it's actually extending. Even though my line stopped there, it's extending to that tapered wall. And you can really see kind of the power behind this and why I ended up using the web command. Instead of, having to create a profile through here, draw a rectangle with a slant on it and extrude it in 2 different directions, all I had to do was draw one line. I'll specify the thickness here. Let's do 8 millimeters wide. You can see that it's symmetric, so it's going to go both sides of the edge, or the line, I should say. And of course we want extend curves turned on. So I'll say okay, and we just created one of those, what I call ribs. Want to round it over, so I'm going to say fillet. And let's just do maybe like a 3.5 millimeter fillet, and we've just rounded off the top of that. And you can see how it matches this curve here, it matches this slope up here. Really powerful command. You'll also notice I only drew one of them. So I want 3 of them. So now I'm going to come in here and do a pattern, a circular pattern. By default, you'll see it comes up as faces. And I'll be honest, I hardly ever use the faces command. I like to switch to features. And here's why. If I left it on faces, I'd have to come in and say, well, I want to do that face, and you'll notice when I click on that face, it's actually part of that guy, and I'm having to make sure I click all the faces correctly. I had to rotate, blah, blah, blah. Kind of intense, especially if your geometry has a lot of stuff. Maybe it's 20 faces, maybe 30 faces. Well, instead, we're going to say features, and I want to pattern the web and the fillet feature. So I could select both of those features out of the timeline. What's the axis? Well, I'm just going to click on this hole right there, that cylindrical hole. By default, you can see the quantity is 3. You can see we could change that. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and it patterned that standoff, or that rib, whatever you want to call it, as a pattern of 3. And we're done with that edge. Okay, or that face, I should say, that side. Okay, let me move forward here. Okay. Let's flip over to this side, and again, I'm just going to create some geometry here. So I'm going to start with a sketch. I'll create a circle, and this hub is actually kind of a smaller size, so it's going to be 20 millimeters. Another tip, I could click on Finish Sketch, or I can just click on my profile, right mouse click, and I want to do this blue extrude. So I'm going to click on that guy, and it automatically finishes my sketch for me. It puts me into my extrude command, so I'm not having to click or move my mouse as much. Let's do 23 millimeters. Okay, this time, let me switch to the camera. And it's kind of hard to see. We're going to be creating this little rib that you see here, and it's got this weird notch. I don't know how close I can get on that. It's got these curved surfaces and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be creating next. And we just drew this boss right here, but you'll notice these ribs are not flush with the top of it. They're kind of down a little bit lower. So that's what we're going to be doing next. So I just created that hub. You can kind of see how it's sticking out a little bit. I want to use that web command again because it's so powerful. And like I mentioned before, you want to draw the sketch line at the height that you want your web to be. Well, I don't want it to be way up here. I want it to be down here somewhere. So we're going to use a construction offset plane. What is the plane? I'm going to click this inside face right here, and you'll see that it put a plane on that face. And now I can specify how far off of that face I want that plane to be. And in this case, I want it to be 10 millimeters up off of the floor. So I'm going to say 10. If I look at it from the side, you can see, here's where the original face was, and then we've moved up 10 millimeters, and that's where the top of those webs are going to be. So I'll say OK, and there's my plane. What's cool about this is I can click on it and right mouse click, and sure enough it shows you can create a sketch on that. We could create another offset plane, etc. So I'm going to say create sketch. I'll draw my line again, but just like I did before, I want to project this face. I'll say OK. I'll draw the line. Just like before, I'm going to kind of come off to the side a little bit like so, making sure I catch to those two circles. And then I can come in and say, you know what, I want that point and that point to line up with each other. Then we'll finish our sketch. We'll use the web command once again, but this web isn't as wide. In fact, I think it's going to be 2 millimeters. Yeah, pretty thin. Leaving the extend curves still checked, that way it extends all the way to this angled face. And there we go. Okay, now how are we going to create these little notches that you see in here and stuff like that? I apologize, the tire is really dirty because it's been used. So I was looking at that, I'm like, what's the easiest way of doing that? And it's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of sloped down at an angle and all kind of stuff. So I just came up with an interesting method. Let's go ahead and reuse our last sketch. So I'm going to edit this sketch here. Okay. And I'm just going to draw a centered rectangle. Now this is pretty cool. I'm going to say centered rectangle. And if I get near this line, you'll see it wants to be coincident with that line. But if I get near the center, you'll see it suddenly change. I don't know if you can kind of see that icon very well, but there's a little triangle there. So it's actually catching to the center of this black object line. And you'll notice as I'm drawing my rectangle now, it's coming from the center of that line. I want it to be 25 millimeters wide. And for the height, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to type in, let's just do like 10, for example. Okay. Now you'll notice that this rectangle was created before the rib. But as soon as I say finish sketch, there's the rib. It shows up. My sketch does not, and that's because by default they get turned off after you've used them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that sketch back on, and there's my rectangle. Okay. I'll pick my profiles and say extrude. So I'm going to start to drag so you can kind of see what's going to happen here. It's going to use that rectangle and it's going to machine away or cut away that rib. I want to make sure I go a specific depth. In this case, -3 millimeters. Let's go -3. But I want these faces here, and it's hard to highlight, these inside faces to be angled. Now I could add some draft after this. I could try using the chamfer command, etc. But you'll notice inside the extrude we have this taper angle. In fact, I don't know if you ever noticed, there's this little ring right here, and if I grab that ring, you can see I can actually add some taper angle, and you can see, sure enough, it's creating that angled face. Now here's the catch. It's doing all 4 faces, so it's also doing this side face here and this side face over here, along with the ones on the longer side. So that's why I created an extra wide rectangle. And maybe after I type in my angle, it's not wide enough. I might have to go back and edit my sketch. But let's see, I want my angle to be 45 degrees. So let's go -45. And we can see we still have enough room there. So I lucked out. But you can see what it's doing. It's actually extruding down and tapering at the same time. So we are left with that result. Now, is this the best way of doing this? I don't know. It's one of the ways, and I like to try and highlight things that I haven't shown in previous live streams and stuff like that. This was one of them. I don't use the taper angle all that much in my extrude, because if I wanted to come back and change this angle, I'd have to remember that it was done in that extrude. So I typically use the draft command under the modify menu, but this is kind of a cool method. As long as you kind of know that's where I added that draft, was in this extrude, you should be good to go. Okay, then let's create the rounded part of it. So let's go ahead and fillet that edge. Let's do a radius of 10 and 10, and that creates that little butterfly look, or whatever you want to call it. And then just like before, we're going to create a pattern, circular pattern, features. Now this time I have to be a little bit more careful. I want to do the web. I also want to do the extrude that we use to cut that out of, and I want to do the fillet. So this time I'm picking 3 features to create a pattern of. What's my axis? I'll go ahead and pick that cylinder there. Quantity in this case is 6. So I'm going to up the quantity to 6. I'll say OK, and we now have that result. Okay. Not sure. Let me click on these faces real quick. There we go. Not sure why they stayed highlighted. Now we basically have the whole hub done the way we want. And if you look at the timeline, it's not overly complex for this kind of a model. So, and I can always come back and make changes to any of these if I need to. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the wheel. So there's, there's the hub that we did. Okay, and now we're going to do the wheel. And you'll notice the wheel has some interesting tread pattern and all that kind of stuff to it. It's got some indentations in here, all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to do next. Let me jump back to my screen here. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I like working with components, so I'm going to right click at my top level and say new component, and we're going to call this one the wheel. I'll say OK, and it's going to create a new component called wheel. It kind of ghosts out my other one, but what's cool is we can use information from the hub. So I'm going to create a new sketch. This time let's just be different. I'm going to do it on, let's just do the front. Let's just do maybe like this top plane right here. That way you guys can see what's going on. I'll click on the top plane. I'll rotate it just like that. Okay, so kind of here's like a top view of my hub. So I want to project some information because I want to catch to very specific points. And because these are circular faces, they don't project that edge. So let me show you what I mean. If I were to say selection filter and I clicked on that guy there, I say OK, you'll notice that there's no line that goes across right there because it basically just projected the face itself. So let's do that again, but this time I'm going to project the body. And watch what happens when I do the body. You'll notice it's almost like a shadow or a silhouette. It goes all the way around, and it does project all of that geometry, but you'll notice it didn't project this edge right here when I said project just that face like I did earlier. So it's basically projecting the outline of the body. And again, let me just review that really quick. Under project, it's that option right there. Most of the time you'll probably be using the selection filter, but specified entities for the selection filter. But every once in a while using the bodies option gives you some really cool results. Okay, so now I'm going to basically draw the side profile of the wheel. Well, again, I'm only going to draw half of it. So I'm going to start right here. It's going to catch right to the center for me. I'm just going to draw up and off to the side a little bit just to kind of get the basic shape. I want to have a nice gentle curve over here. So to do that, I'm going to use some constraints. So I'm going to say I want that point there to be vertically lined up with that point there. So I used the vertical constraint. Then I'm going to come in and do a 3-point arc. So what's the first point? What's the second point? And then you'll notice as I move, it's asking what is the third point. And I'm just going to randomly click somewhere like so. And I've kind of defined the shape of the wheel. Obviously it's not fully defined, so I'm going to add some dimensions into here. So first of all, I want the radius of this guy to be 50. And watch what happens when I do that. It kind of changes the shape of it. It's still a 3-point arc, but now it's a radius of 50 from the center of that arc. Then I'm going to add a dimension for the overall height. And let's set that to be 100. And we can see, even if I were to change that to be like 120 or whatever, that arc is still going to be a 3-point arc. It's still going to be a radius of 50. So I'm going to set that back to 100. And we're good to go there. So let's finish our sketch. We'll create a revolve of that profile around that axis, and we can kind of see it's going to be flat on one side and kind of curved, and we can see how it fits down into the wheel hub. So using the wheel hub gives us the information on how big this part needs to be, how wide it needs to be, etc. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And again, it's everything we're doing is underneath this wheel component. So we created the sketch and we did a revolve. Okay, so what I want to start doing now is creating the tread. So I'm going to put a small fillet on here. Let's just do maybe like a 1mm fillet on that edge because it's kind of soft on the actual tire. So I just filleted that edge in 3D. And I want to draw a shape and emboss it onto this particular face here. So like we did with the hub, I'm going to create an offset plane. Okay, so let's do maybe this top plane here. And I'm going to kind of look at it from the side. I'm just going to drag that plane up, and I want it to be above that face. It doesn't matter how far, honestly. And then let's just create a sketch on that face, or on that plane, I should say. So our piece of paper is now floating above our wheel on that construction plane. Okay. Let's project some geometry, because I want to grab some geometry here. So I'm going to hit P for project. Now this time I'm not going to do the whole body. This time I want to be more specific. I want to project just this face, and I also want to project this fillet. So I'm going to click on this curved face and that fillet, and I'll rotate kind of isometrically so you can kind of see what's going on there. So projected that face and then that fillet. We have that information now on our sketch. If I draw a line, I'm going to go from this outside, and I apologize, it's really kind of hard to see, but I'm picking this outside fillet edge, and I'm going to pick this face edge here, which actually happens to be on the origin, but I just created a line that goes all the way across. Now I want this to be a construction line, so I'm going to select it and say construction, and there you can see it turned it to a construction line. Now, why was I so specific here? Well, I want to draw basically a triangle that touches the outside of this fillet, and it touches this face right here. So that's kind of what we did there. And here's another cool trick. I'm going to create another construction line just out here in space somewhere, something like that. I want this line to be in the middle of this line. In fact, let me start over there. I'm going to click on this midpoint. I'm going to click way up here just to show you I'm not clicking the center. I'm clicking that line, and I'm clicking this line here, and you can see it moved it to the center. So the center of this line is in the center of that line. I also want this line to be the exact same length as that one. So I'm going to say equal. I want that line and that line to be equal in length. And now you can see, sure enough, that extended, and they're the exact same length. They're equal. Okay, then all I have to do is basically connect the dots. So I'm going to create a line from there to there. Now I notice right now it's drawing it as a construction line type. And I can see that that's checked right there, so I'm going to uncheck that. And now it's an actual object line. So I can go there. Then I could click from here to here, and you'll notice I have to like click each point. So I'm basically connecting the dots. Okay? Or I'm going to undo. I can use the rectangle command, and we have one that I don't use all that often, but it's 3-point rectangle. So check this out. I'm going to say I want to go from that point there to that point there, and now you'll notice it's drawing a rectangle, and all it's asking for now is a third point. I can click there, and you can see that that's connected. Now you'll notice that this line isn't constrained, and if I click on it, you'll notice that it moves a little bit. Okay, so that's why I again tend to make sure I'm getting the results that I want. So I click there, you know, and I can see that sure enough my lines are fully constrained. Yeah, this might take more mouse clicks to do, but I can see I got the result that I want. I could have, you know, reconstrained the angled rectangle and all that kind of stuff. I'm just showing you different options that you have. Okay, we'll finish that sketch. I've got my kind of my tread shape that I want. I lied, actually. Let me edit that sketch, and I forgot to offset it. Now that I have my shape, I'm still back in my sketch. I can click on this rectangle, and I can create another rectangle or diamond between those, and let's just do 4 millimeters according to my drawing. And now I'll say OK. And if we rotate, we can see again that this is kind of floating up above the part. But now I have, in fact, let me do finish sketch. We're going to create an emboss. So what are the sketch profiles? So I need to make sure I grab all the profiles that I need. What are the faces? So I'm going to click on that face there. Okay. And you can kind of see what it's doing. It's taking that profile and it's embossing it on a curved surface, which is really cool. The depth I want to be, I can see it's in the minus. Oh, and just FYI, if it looks like it's sticking up above the part, that's because it's doing an emboss. You have the option to do a deboss, and that's going down into the part. So let's do minus 0.7. I'll say OK. And there is the result that we get. I'm going to add a little bit more detail to this. There's kind of a flat face right here. And again, I'm going to cheat. Instead of making a complex profile, I'm just going to come in here and say chamfer. And let's just do 3 millimeters. And you can see that it's going to chamfer that edge and that edge there. And I get that particular shape. So why did I do it this way? Well, I could have done it here, but remember I used the offset command, and then I'd have to come in and, you know, draw some lines, figure out what the dimension is for that, do it on both sides, etc., etc. It would just, to me, it takes a lot more time. So I just used the chamfer command. And the other cool thing about it is it's really easy to come back and make changes and say I only want that to be 2 millimeters instead, for example, or I want it to be 4 millimeters. You know, you can really kind of change what your tread is going to look like very, very quickly. Okay. Okay, so now I basically have the shape of the tread that I want. Let's go ahead and create a pattern of this, circular pattern. Again, kind of repeating myself over and over again, we're going to use features. So I want to do the emboss feature. and I want to do the chamfer feature. Think about how many faces I would have had to have selected if I were to use the faces option. So that's why I really like the features option. Axis is going to be the center of the hub. Even though we're working on the wheel, I'm saying let's go around the center of the hub. And what's the quantity? Let's do 24 in this case. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And sometimes pattern takes a little while. It has to calculate, make sure all the edges are valid and all this kind of stuff. So again, be cautious with patterns. Make sure you have it looking the way you want, and you'll see that, you know, in probably about 20 seconds it calculated that and it created that tread pattern. Okay, the next thing I want to do, it's kind of hard to show, but there's these little indentations that go around the tire. So let's create that. So let's do another offset plane. And I'm just going to pick, you know, maybe like this front face or something like that, or I could pick the front plane. And if I click and hold, I can grab that XZ plane if I want to. Doesn't really matter. And I want to come off away from the part a little bit. Again, doesn't matter how far in this case. Then we're going to, again, grab some information. So I'm going to look at the front of this, and I'm going to slightly rotate. So I orientated it to the front, and then I'm just kind of basically rotating it down a little bit so I can kind of see some information. So let's create a sketch. Sorry, I should have done the sketch first, and then rotated. Okay. Then I'm going to project. So I hit the P key. I want to project some specified entities. And I want to grab, for example, maybe like this edge here. Because what I really want is that point. And I really want that point there. And we're going to basically draw a rectangle that's going to touch these points. So by projecting that information onto our sketch plane, we now have some stuff that we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And let's take a look at it from the front. And I'm just going to draw a random sized rectangle. I don't care what size, something like that. And then I'm going to use the midpoint. So I'm going to say I want the middle of that edge to be right on that point. Now you might be saying, well, why are you using a midpoint? Well, I need to specify a depth, a distance down. And I also want to make sure, because this is a curved surface, I want to make sure we're removing material. So if I had said line up this corner here, that line would actually be underneath and it wouldn't remove some material. And this will make more sense here in just a second. So I'm going to say midpoint from there to there. Okay. And then finally, I'll say I want to dimension from that point. I want this to be maybe like 15 millimeters or something. And we can see that that rectangle extended down and it extended up. And now I have a pretty large profile that when I go to cut into this part, you're going to see, I'll just keep going, it's going to remove a lot of material, including a lot of air, but I know that I'm going across that curve. Okay, let me back up and show you exactly why I did that. If I had lined up the top of the rectangle, so imagine this one up here doesn't exist, if I had said this is my rectangle, it's 15 millimeters long, and the top of it connects right there, and I went to extrude this, and I cut into my part, notice what happens. It did exactly what we told it to. It took that line and it extruded underneath that curve. So that is why I, again, tend to over-exaggerate in some cases, and in this case quite a bit, but I now have a nice profile that's definitely going to remove everything I need. And so that's why I use the midpoint. And hopefully that makes sense after now seeing it live. Okay, so how far do we need to cut into this part? Well, I don't want to type in a distance. I want to go to a specific point. So I'm going to say to object, and I want to go right to this where this triangle touches my fillet. So I'm going to click right there, and you're going to see it's going to extrude whatever distance it needs to go right to that point. I'll say OK, and we've now cut this little pocket inside of the wheel. However, I don't want this to be straight up and down. I want it to be angled a little bit because this is like really deep right here. And you might be like, oh, you could use that taper that you showed earlier. So let's go ahead and do a taper of like 10 degrees, or let's go minus 10. You'll notice that it only tapers like in one direction. It's not tapering this angle or anything like that. So I can't use taper in this case. Then you might be like, okay, well, why don't you use the draft command? So I can come in here and say draft. And it's asking for a pull direction. And draft asks for a flat face. In fact, you'll notice it's only picking the face on the back, because that is literally the only flat face that I have. I mean, I do have some in here, but I basically need to rotate it on this edge right here, and this triangle is curved. It's not flat. If I said this is my draft plane, it's going to hinge along this bottom edge, and it'll destroy more of my tire than I want. And so I literally need to hinge right on that edge. So draft is not going to work in this case either. So how do I go about doing this? Well, we're going to use just the move command, and we're going to move a face. But I want to move it along a straight edge. And this, it's hard to see, but this is actually a curved edge because of the radius of the whole wheel. So here's a neat little trick. I'm going to add in an axis. And you'll notice one of them is axis through 2 points. What are the vertices? I'm going to click that vertice there and that vertice there. And you can see a little cyan line. I'm going to stretch this out so you can kind of see what it did. But it basically created an axis line that cuts right through those 2 points. I don't even think I can zoom up far enough. Yeah, you can kind of see it. So there's the axis line, and there's the curved surface. So now you can see we definitely have a flat face and we have a curved surface. But now I have something flat and straight that we can use to rotate with. So we're going to use the move command. What do we want to move? Well, we don't want to move the whole body. We want to move a face or faces. I'm going to say face. What's the face? This guy here. Okay. Now you'll notice I get these little tick marks and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to click on the face somewhere. Then we have different move types. We can translate, we can free move, we can rotate, we can move from point to point, etc. I'm going to say rotate. Now it says, what's the axis? Well, I can click that line right there, and that face is going to rotate around that axis. So you can kind of see that as I'm doing the kind of like that live rotate. It is pivoting right on that line. And I want to, let's do minus 10 in this case. Yep. And you can see now it kind of follows the same shape as this curved surface here. It's not quite as deep, but we still are showing that it's being embossed into the face there. That little line right there, you'll notice still shows up. That is under the construction folder, so you can see it's an axis. So I could just turn off my construction folder and we can see that that goes away. Let's create a pattern, circular pattern. Features, what do I want to do? Well, I want to do the extrude feature, and I want to do the move. Now I don't have to select the axis, all I have to do is select the move and the extrude. What's the axis? This guy here. We want to do 24 of these like we did previously. And I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. And again, it might take 20-30 seconds to calculate. It's making sure everything looks good, everything mathematically calculates correctly. So sometimes it can take a while. And there's our result. And we can see that they all look the same. They're all tapered the way we want. That's looking pretty cool. In fact, I'm pretty much done with the wheel, except for this other side. So let's create a mirror. Don't want to mirror faces. Let's mirror this component. What's the mirror plane? It's going to be this flat face. I'll say OK. And now you'll notice, if I scroll down, we have wheel, and then we have wheel mirror. Well, I want this to be all one, so let's combine them together. So that's my target, that's the tool, and we want to join them together, and you can see the nice preview we get. I'll say OK. And I get this question a lot. Notice it says wheel and it says wheel mirror, but we've combined them into one component. So what is this? Well, it's basically an empty component. We took the body and we combined it up into here. So this really doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to right click on wheel mirror and say remove. Now don't say delete, okay? I would say 99% of the time you're going to want to remove things out of your browser. So let's say remove, and you'll see sure enough it goes away. But I didn't lose anything. If I had said delete, it could potentially cause issues in the timeline, especially if other things were referencing that. Okay, let's take an appearance. I'm going to hit A for appearance. I think we've been using this black texture on other parts, so I'm going to just drag that onto there. We can kind of see what that looks like. Kind of looks like a rubber texture. And the last thing I'm going to do, we'll activate the top level assembly there. We can kind of see what that looks like. And we just created that hub and the wheel. Now you'll notice these two are kind of just separate components. I can drag one off of the other, which is kind of annoying. So let's create a new component called wheel assembly. And I'm just going to drag those two guys into my wheel assembly. And the reason I do that is now I can turn, both those parts on and off at the same time. If we decide to move this guy, it's going to move, like a whole assembly, the hub and the wheel at the same time. So let's go ahead and save. And that is it for today's session. We actually created two parts, and I would say, not simple parts, but we used some cool technology. We used the rib command, we used the pattern command. We kept our sketches simple and pattern things, so we used the emboss command to create that really cool tread. So hopefully you learned something new today. Angelo is going to be off next week, so keep an eye out for an upcoming live stream next week. I'm not sure exactly what the topic is going to be. I might try and bring in a guest speaker. I might see if we do part 6. I'm not 100% sure yet. So anyways, I want to thank Angelo. I don't see any questions that came up in the chat. So thank you for attending. And if you have any comments or whatever, please feel free to comment in the YouTube channel or the live stream once it's posted out there. We do read those. If you have any topic ideas or any questions or whatever, we do review those. If you like this, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, give us a thumbs down. We always appreciate the feedback and hope you have a fun time fusioning. Thank you.